So, is it really all over for Bernie Sanders? And who should Biden choose as his VP if it is? Okay, so we just completed the pivotal debate between Bernie Sanders, my boy Bernie Sanders, and Vice former Vice President Biden, Joe Biden, and I got to tell you, first and foremost, the whole debate was overshadowed by obviously the coronavirus, which I never expected the coronavirus at all to get this big. This is crazy, man. I just got back from Walmart and everything was just gone. Everything. It was insane. So, everybody out there, please, please, please take this coronavirus seriously. Don't be like me and just take it for granted and just don't be like me and just neglected it for weeks and weeks and weeks. Take this thing very, very seriously because as you saw tonight between Biden and Sanders, it is the most pressing issue right now, and it has literally changed the world at the snap of a finger, at the Thanos snap of a finger. First of all, Bernie Sanders did really, really well. He always does well in the debates. He's really, really great at proving his point and proving his point across and getting his point across and getting his message across. He's better at anybody I've ever seen getting his message across. Any candidate I think I've ever seen doing that. And it's hard to fluster Bernie in a debate. And Biden did really, really, really well tonight. Biden looked really, really, really presidential. I know that term can be very subjective and it means, what does that mean really? But whatever it is, whatever you think presidential means, Biden looked very presidential tonight. He gave great rebuttals, which normally he doesn't. He gave great rebuttals, and he fought Bernie's arguments really, really hard. So, and he gave really good, well thought out, well profound responses to the other arguments. So, both men did a really good job. But the coronavirus highlighted something that I think if you're a Bernie supporter like me, it's kind of heartbreaking. What America wants right now, particularly older Americans, and you see it with the coronavirus, they want order. They want order and they want help. But more importantly, they want order. Older Americans, particularly 45 and up, who are supporting Biden in huge numbers, and younger people like 45 and below are supporting Sanders in huge numbers. The problem for Bernie Sanders, millennials like me, millennials who support Bernie Sanders, there's a lot of us, is we aren't the biggest voting bloc in America right now. We aren't. The baby boomers are. And baby boomers are 45 and up, or 50 and up. They're much older. And so they're all voting for Biden because older people in this country, they don't want a revolution. They do want some type of change, but more than anything, they want order and they want help. They want financial help and medical help and things of that nature, but they don't necessarily want a systematic change because they're just so used to the way things have been. They can't really visualize an alternative as opposed to younger people who really, really want the systematic change and want that alternative. So we're just lucked out that millennials, and Bernie Sanders supporters, we're just lucked out that we're not the biggest voting bloc yet. That may change in 4 years. That may change in 8 years when we do become the biggest voting bloc yet, and then we can finally get a progressive candidate, a progressive economic candidate, because that's what America needs: a progressive economic candidate. Because capitalism has just run amok, and we need to rein in capitalism a little bit more than a moderate candidate is going to want to rein in capitalism. Whether you're a millennial or a baby boomer, we all realize that the rules are set up to benefit, the economic rules are set up in this country to benefit the rich in spite of the poor. But it just seems like millennials and the younger people, we're more apt to fight for an economic revolution, fight for a revolution to change that, as opposed to the older generation. I think the older generation think the system needs tweaks, whereas the younger generation think the system needs a complete breakdown. But with that said, I hate to say this as a Bernie Sanders supporter, you can see that Feel the Burn. I hope you can read that. But I'm a huge Bernie Sanders supporter. Even a few friends of mine, I was so upset because I'm from Chicago. A few friends of mine went to the rally about a week and a half back, and I was so upset I couldn't make it, but I had work. I was so upset. But unfortunately, in the Illinois primaries in my home state and the other primaries of 3 more states, if it doesn't get moved because of the coronavirus, that's coming up this Tuesday. So we have another Super Tuesday. I will be voting in that primary. I would be voting, obviously, for Bernie Sanders. But unfortunately, even if Bernie wins Illinois, my home state, which I think he might, I think it still may go to Biden, but I think Bernie has a good chance to win it. I think the other 3 states will go to Biden. And the reason I think they'll go to Biden, I think the reason Biden will win the eventual nomination, even though it kind of hurts to say that. I respect Biden a lot. I do. I just don't think he's the candidate we need right now, or the country needs right now. I think the country needs Biden or Yang. But I'll get to Yang in a second. But yeah, Biden, I think, will win the nomination. And I think Tuesday's results will make that very a foregone conclusion that Biden's going to win the nomination. But, okay, so if Biden wins the nomination and he goes on to win the presidency, which, thank God, anyone but Trump, if Biden goes on to win the presidency, what can he do to not only unify the party, but unify the country? And not only that, more importantly, what can he do to change this country for the better? It's a great country. What can we do to make it even greater? What can we do to make it not just great for some people, but great for all people? What can we do to do that? And I have a few suggestions how Biden can do that, simply by making a few appointments within his party and his own presidential ticket. The first thing, I think Biden personally, I think I know he wants to choose Amy Klobuchar, and I really like Amy Klobuchar, and I respect that. I know he wants to choose her because he did say he wants to choose a woman, which is totally fine. But just to choose a woman, I think it's a disrespect to women. I think choose the right woman and don't just pick a woman for the sake of being a woman. I think that's very sexist, and I think that's very patronizing to women. There's a lot of great women choices, that Biden can go to, but I actually think Biden should do something. I think he should choose a progressive, not a moderate, to run with him. Now, I know what you're saying, like a moderate would make sense. He's a moderate. The moderate would back his healthcare ideas, his economic ideas. I get that. But if he wants to unify the base, and if Biden wants to really prove that he doesn't want to take us back to the Obama years, where I love Obama, obviously. I'm from Chicago. Obama's a Chicago guy. But in the Obama years, black people were still struggling. Working class folks were still struggling. They were better off than perhaps the Trump years, but we were still struggling. Like, going back to the Obama years, they weren't really that great for working class people or people that were struggling. They weren't. So we can't go back. We have to go forward. And Obama even said that too. We can't go back. We got to go forward. So if Biden wants to prove he doesn't want to take the country back, because it can't go back and it shouldn't go back, he wants to move the country forward, I think he should choose a progressive to run with the ticket. And he needs someone to energize the Democratic base and energize his ticket and bring those young people out, those important young people votes, to come out and vote this time in 2020 to beat Trump. And he can't just rely on people hating Trump. That's going to be enough for young people to come out and vote. Like, you got to give young people, you got to give us a reason to vote. I'm going to vote anyway because I always vote. But for some young people, that's not enough. You got to give them a reason to vote as opposed to a reason not to vote. So I think, that said, Biden should choose Andrew Yang as his vice president. Andrew Yang has already supported Joe Biden. Andrew Yang has been the first to talk about automation, and he's been the first to talk about working class, other than Bernie, he's been the first to talk about working class folks and the impact that automation and the economy and trade deals and things of that nature have had on working class Americans. So Andrew Yang's message has always been, how do we benefit working class Americans? And that ties in well with Biden, who in 2016, working class Americans would have, they did polls, working class Americans would have voted for Biden over Trump in 2016. Like working class Americans in the Rust Belt states. And Andrew Yang has been speaking to them from the get-go. And secondly, Andrew Yang is advocating, like young people love Andrew Yang, like even some old people love Andrew Yang. Even Republicans, there's a good number of Trump Republicans who like Andrew Yang. There's a good number of Republicans who aren't Trump Republicans that like Andrew Yang. And there's even independents that like Andrew Yang. So that would take away votes from the Republican Party, from Trump. That would swing those votes to Biden and Yang. Could you imagine a blue collar, hardworking man or woman in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin? They see a Biden Yang ticket. Those guys have been speaking to working class Americans from the jump. Like, it's not a stretch at all that they would jump from voting for Trump, like they did in 2016, to vote for Biden and Yang in 2020. That wouldn't be a stretch at all, especially since the coronavirus may send us into a recession, and especially because working class American wages have still been stagnant when Trump said they wouldn't be stagnant. They're still stagnant, and working class Americans are still struggling 4 years later. So to put Yang on that ticket would be amazing. And plus, to top it off, the cherry on top, Yang has been advocating UBI, Universal Basic Income, something this country desperately needs. Something this country needs, because so many working class people are working 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, 2-3 jobs a week, and they're still struggling to pay their rent. They're still struggling to pay their mortgage. They're still struggling to pay daycare. They're still struggling to pay medical costs. It's absurd. And so if you work 40, 50, 60, you work full-time hours in America, there's no way you should be struggling to put food on the table. There's no way you should be struggling to pay rent or pay your mortgage or pay medical costs or daycare. Not in my America. Not in America, the greatest country on earth that had the greatest amount of wealth. You should not be struggling if you're working full-time hours. No way in hell. And so imagine if Biden put Yang on the ticket and they did support something like a UBI. Man, the working class vote would be, so many folks would jump from Trump, from voting for Trump to supporting Biden and Yang ticket. That ticket would be an amazing, phenomenal ticket. A phenomenal ticket. And that would be a tremendous idea to put Yang on the ticket. It would totally outweigh any negatives. Totally. Second, I think Biden should consider two options: putting Elizabeth Warren, having her as chairman of the Fed, or two, having her as Secretary of Treasury, or however you pronounce it, whatever. But I think that would be, I think she would do well in either one of those posts. Unfortunately, she didn't get the nomination, but I think she would do well in either of those posts. I think he should really consider that. And third, I think the most important piece, if he really wants to show Biden that we want to bring together the Democratic Party, the progressives, and the moderates, and we want to bring together the country too, I think he should really, and he wants to, more importantly, help the American working class more than anything. I think more importantly, I think he should nominate as his Secretary of Labor. I think Biden should nominate Bernie Sanders. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. Like, Bernie Sanders does have the expertise. He knows how government works. He knows how economic system in this country works. He knows about labor unions and things of that nature. But not only that, like, he can put Bernie Sanders in charge of really holding these pharmaceutical companies, executives who are profiting off Americans. He can put Bernie ahead of holding Wall Street in corporate America executives who are profiting off working class Americans. He can hold those folks accountable. He can put Bernie Sanders in charge of Wall Street's greed and pharmaceutical greed, and he could put him in charge of hourly wage at companies, the minimum wage. He can put him in charge of a potential UBI deal with Andrew Yang, and he can work side by side with Andrew Yang on that. He can put him in charge of doing something about executive pay. The CEOs in some companies make 300 to 1, make 300 times more than their average worker when they don't work 300 times as hard. I mean, it's insane. He can put Bernie Sanders in charge of that. Basically, what I'm saying, he can put Bernie Sanders in charge of anything that doesn't have to do with healthcare, since obviously they just see completely differently on healthcare, with Bernie wanting Medicare for all and Biden wanting a public option, basically an extension of Obamacare. They don't see eye to eye at all on Medicare. So I mean, he can put Bernie in charge of a good number of economic issues that don't pertain to Medicare, which would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense, and I think Americans would be okay with that too, because a large majority of Americans, they still want a public plan and a private plan. They don't want to eliminate private insurance, and so I mean they wouldn't have to worry about that if Bernie Sanders was just the head of Secretary of Labor and not ahead of the healthcare policies and things of that nature. So I think choosing Bernie Sanders as his Secretary of Labor would not only be great for Joe Biden and his administration, but it would be great for America. Joe, if you're listening, please consider that if you inevitably do win the Democratic nomination and the presidency. So that's my 2 cents on this issue. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys for supporting Oreo Ingram. Please take care of yourself with the coronavirus. Wash your hands. Use hand sanitizers. Just be smart. If you're not feeling well, stay home. Cause this thing is like a real deal. And I downplayed it for a long time. I'm a typical dude. I'm like, man, you'll be alright. It'll go away in a few days. You'll be cool. But man, now this thing may cause a recession.